Have you ever hosted a party at a house, maybe, or an event somewhere else, and you want it to be so perfect you end up losing complete enjoyment of the actual event? I've got two examples. One is my wedding. I'm not going to say that I lost all enjoyment of the wedding. It was by far one of the most exciting days of my life. My children being the other two. But on the morning of our wedding, I was at Pride Park. That's where our Pride Park football stadium. That's where our reception was, and I was there. And I thought, instead of kind of getting ready, kind of like shaving my beard for the first time. No, Hannah won't let me do that. But no, I was at Pride Park football stadium unloading a van full of speakers and lights. And it got to about an hour before the service started, and I was still at Pride Park football stadium just finishing off. And I got driven to the church, St Thomas Church in Keddison Road, and I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt when I turned up to church. And the look on everyone's faces was just hilarious. Like, Ben, you're not ready. It's like, well, I've been getting everything else ready. Looking back on that, I wish that I'd changed that morning. I do wish that I'd asked some of my friends and had trusted my friends that they would set up the reception so I could really focus on getting myself prepared. Immediately, went to the toilets, put on my suit, all ready. At that time, I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. But looking back on it, yeah, I kind of wish that I'd changed it. Another example, much more recently, is selling our house. As some of you might know, we've been talking about moving house for pretty much the whole time we've been married, we decided to bite the bullet and do it. So 2 weeks ago, we put the house up for sale, and I happened to be off for those 2 weeks off work. There was me thinking, before we decided the house up for sale, there was me thinking I might take a nice 2 weeks, do a bit of DIY around the house, might go for a few nice gentle bike rides, get a bit of my fitness levels up. But no, I spent pretty much those 2 weeks tidying and sorting out the house, which is a scary feat when it's usually Hannah that does that. But Hannah's at work. So we had a house viewing on Wednesday, and it was about 11 o'clock. So that morning I had to take the kids to school, came back from school, and I had 2 hours to make the house spick and span. When they knocked on that door, because I was doing the viewings as well, I should have been at a state ready to say, oh, welcome to our lovely house, maybe looking all kind of quite nice myself, that kind of thing, but no, I was a wreck. I was so sweaty, I'd just been lifting loads of heavy stuff, and the problem was I couldn't stop. So even when I was showing them around the house, I kept seeing things. I was like, quickly pick that up, hide it behind my bag, put it in my pocket. I just could not, and it sounds weird because it's not really an enjoyable event, but I couldn't focus on the house viewing enough because I was too focused because I hadn't given myself enough time to prepare for that, and therefore I was stuck doing the preparation even when they were there. Let's switch it the other way around. What do you enjoy more? So instead of hosting your events, what do you enjoy more? Do you enjoy making sure that everything's absolutely perfect, enjoying a lovely day, or do you enjoy doing something without any work at all? Sounds slightly confusing. I was having a chat to some friends of ours. We had some strange conversations at work, and we ended up with this conclusion that a sandwich always tastes better when someone else has made it. Yeah, Matt's going, oh yeah, I'm sure. Again, we'll come to that one maybe a little bit later and like what that means. We have in this passage, we have Jesus going to this house in Bethany. But before we start and really look at that, it's important to note that Jesus didn't always stay at people's houses. This wasn't an always thing. In fact, in Luke 9:58, it says this. It says, Jesus told his disciples, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Now, we're not going to delve into that too deeply, but we can probably take from that the fact that Jesus would often spend nights out and about, sleeping in fields, under the stars, and probably a stone for a pillow. So, it's not that he was used to a life of luxury. He wasn't going to Mary Martha's house and expecting this glamorous feast and plush chair to sit in. No, he'd often spend nights out and about, sleeping rough. But at times, he would accept hospitality. At this time of Jesus' life, there was the closing time of his life, really. And he probably wanted somewhere that he could trust, somewhere nice to stay, somewhere where his dearest friends would be. So he was on his way, and he accepted the invitation from Mary, Martha, and probably their brother Lazarus, although he doesn't mention in this passage. But he accepted this stay in their house. It was his closing times of lives. Other people maybe shut their hearts to him at this point because of the things that he preached, but this door was always open to him. It's a scary thought, isn't it? Again, this passage doesn't actually say how many people came to the house. It doesn't explicitly state that his disciples came with him. But we can look at other examples in scriptures and actually probably make the assumption that Jesus had a fairly large entourage of people coming in with him. It could have just been his disciples, could have been some more. If I said to you that you're going to host every single elder of not just this church, but also Woodlands Church for a day, what would be your first reaction? Oh no, not them. No, quick, get tidying. It's a scary thought. I tell you what, this passage, Alex said, it's short. It is. And you also don't need a degree in theology to really work out the main meaning. Which is quite good. Probably why Aaron gave it to me to preach on. Thanks, Aaron. It's a really simple message, isn't it? Spending time with God is much more important than getting things ready or doing things so incredibly well that you spend your whole time doing it. But there's some nice finer detail in this passage. So we've got the main point kind of out of the way. We'll come to that at the end. But let's take a look at some nice fine points. And the first point that I really want to focus on is the fact that Martha, she's not all bad. This passage frustrates me sometimes. It's all too easy to read this passage and think that Martha got it completely wrong. And don't get me wrong, she did kind of miss the point. But maybe she didn't. In John chapter 11, we hear that Jesus was 4 days late for Lazarus' funeral. A little bit frustrating, I'm sure, for the family. But when he showed up, the sisters took him to the cemetery, and Jesus stood in front of the tomb. He then asked for the tomb to be rolled away. And who responded first? Well, it was Martha. Plunged in grief, really sad Martha, practical Martha, thinking to herself, ew. Now, I'm kind of paraphrasing the Bible here, but you can imagine that she probably did say that. She said, Lord, you better not do that. I mean, he's been dead for 4 days. And by this time, he'll absolutely stink. Martha was that kind of woman, by the looks of it. She had her practical hat on. She was realistic to know that if you're going to have dinner for probably around about 16 people, you're going to have to do a lot of hard work. And there's going to be lots of work to do. Sitting around at anybody's feet isn't going to get the food made, is it? It's also important to note that Martha was a believer. Martha believed fully in Jesus, even if at that point she didn't quite understand exactly who she was. Martha, again, looking at the Lazarus story in John 11, Martha says this. She says, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Now that's some pretty extreme faith to have at that point. To know that Jesus was essentially God. To have that faith to say, if you'd actually been here, Lazarus would still be alive. She then says, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. So even now Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, Martha still has that faith, still has that conviction that Jesus will bring him back to life. That's quite something. So don't get me wrong, Martha did, in this passage that we're looking at today, Martha did get it slightly wrong. But Martha was still a believer, she had full faith in Jesus, and she was definitely of the character of that practical hat. So Jesus clearly felt nice and relaxed at the house. In fact, he was able to come into the house, sit down and start talking about the kingdom of God. There was no formalities particularly. In fact, Jesus would often turn up to places. In fact, we hear about that in the Bible a lot, where he'd turn up and start preaching. But not often do we hear that people would sit down at his feet and talk, particularly women. To have a woman of Mary sat down at her feet was quite a shock. And again, we'll come to that later on. You could argue that the way Jesus spoke to Martha in response to Martha's complaint was also slightly more relaxed and considered, where maybe if it was in a more larger, hostile environment, maybe Jesus might have said something a bit different. But I'm just trying to paint the atmosphere here, that this was a relaxed, larger family and friends seated atmosphere. It wasn't I'm preaching to thousands of people. It was a relaxed atmosphere. So don't feel bad if you have sympathies with Martha. She did get it wrong. She did get confused. She did get the priorities wrong at points. But, yeah, don't get it wrong. In fact, if you were to invite someone into your house, it would be pretty bad of you to then completely ignore them for the whole of the time and just to serve them dinner, wouldn't it? Although I'm sure we've probably almost fallen guilty of that a few times when maybe you've had a house party, you've maybe invited some people into your house and dinner's gone wrong. Your main dinner's burned or something, or, oh my life, it's not cooking quick enough. And you end up spending far too long in the kitchen that you want, and then your poor guest is sat there going, what should we do, what should we do? Or, in our case, Hannah's probably in the kitchen, frantically cooking, going, oh my life, can I really trust Ben to be with our guests? Oh dear. Here's another point. So, Martha's not all bad. Here's another point. Is Jesus, in this passage, saying that service is wrong? Martha's doing the service, Mary's not doing the service at the point in the passage. Jesus clearly says to Martha that Mary has chosen the right thing. So is Jesus saying that service is wrong? Well, firstly, I want to say no, straight away. Let's take another quick look at Martha. If it wasn't for Martha's of this world, would anything actually get done? Few sermons would be prepared. Very few missions would ever take place. If it weren't for Martha's, would there be any evangelism? Would people be getting out there and doing things? Any church leader would be grateful for a church of Marthas, because things would happen. Things would get done. Yeah, Mary's going, please. So service isn't wrong. However, let's take a look at the detail of this passage and see where Martha went wrong. Because Jesus is clearly saying that Martha took a step wrong at some point. But why and where? Now, there's no obvious mention of it in the lead up to this passage, but again, if we take a look at other parts of Scripture, particularly in Luke 9, in verse 52, it states that often when they go out, when disciples and Jesus are going somewhere, they will send messages in advance. That was the way things were done. There was no calendars or online calendars. There were no text saying, oh, by the way, I'm on my way. They would often send messages in advance. It would be safe to assume that when this happened, there was some kind of message forwards saying, I'm on my way. So there was ample opportunity for Martha and Mary to prepare stuff in advance. It brings me back to a delightful story. So unless Martha was incredibly forgetful, they had time to prepare. And that brings me back to a lovely story of when I was bathing the kids very, very early on, maybe just Esther, I don't know, and there was a knock at my door. I was like, oh, I wonder who that could be. It's like, Hannah, there's someone at the door. I said, I'm busy, I can't answer it. So, okay, so I ran down the stairs, opened it, it was my mum. And at that point I thought, what are you doing here? For those who don't know, my mum lives in Essex. It's about 3.5 hours drive away. It's like, huh? Why are you here? And she went, you've forgotten, haven't you? It turns out that in a chat on the phone a few weeks before, my mum said, oh yeah, I'm up your way at the Swanwick Conference Centre, so when I finish, can I pop down for a night and spend a bit of time with you? I've completely forgotten. Whoops. Hopefully Martha wasn't as forgetful as I was at that point. However, I wanted to spend time with my mum, so what did I do? I threw a pizza in the oven. I didn't spend time thinking, oh my life, I need a posh dinner because my mum's here. Admittedly, that's probably what my mum wouldn't have done that either. She would have probably thrown a pizza in the oven too. But yeah. There's also, if you read this story on the surface, you could also assume that Mary didn't do anything. However, again, if we are assuming that there was a messenger sent in advance, But yeah, if we're assuming that Mary had that there was a message in advance, it could be quite clear that actually Mary and Martha could have been preparing food, preparing the event in advance. In fact, in Martha's complaint to Jesus, it clearly says, "Mary has left me." So Mary did do some work by the looks of it. Mary had done some work. However, when Jesus had arrived, Mary then goes, "I'm done. Jesus is here." There's also really another interesting point to this. If you take a look at where it is in Luke's Gospel, Luke isn't necessarily always chronological, but the story just before this passage is the Good Samaritan, where the key part of it is about being a good neighbour, caring and looking after other people, doing acts of good service, if you will. So is Jesus saying that service is wrong? Well, most certainly not. In fact, Martha is being a very good neighbour, in a sense, to start with. She recognises that Jesus and his men have been on the road for quite some time walking there, and that they're probably hungry. Martha clearly has a gift of hospitality, and she wants to meet their needs. Active love for your neighbours is great, but listening and putting into practice the words of Jesus are much more important. And that's what Mary had got right at this point. So are acts of service wrong? No, not at all. But Mary had done acts of service. But then, when the time came, Mary stopped acts of service and concentrated. So let's take a look at what I've referred to as the explosion and the gentle calming afterwards. Martha, you can picture it. It's a classic kind of soap environment, isn't it? Where there's someone slaving away, doing lots of work, and every now and again they're peeking into the kitchen or they're peeking into the lounge, going, that. I've heard that noise far too many times. Martha, her use of language when she confronts Jesus is very, very stern. It really is a case of, I've had enough. There's no gentle kind of you know what, I'm getting a bit stressed in the kitchen, could someone come and help me? It's got right to the very end of her tether. She is right there. She's been suffering and it's like, come on. In fact, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work myself? Tell her to help me. It's a bit... Well, there's an assumption there, isn't there? There's an assumption that she's right. There's an assumption that Martha is correct at the very start. There's also an assumption that Jesus would sort it out. That Jesus would do what Martha wants her to do exactly. In fact, Martha is giving Jesus a command here. It's a scary thing, isn't it? It also seems that Martha is also quite angry at Jesus for letting Mary sit there. I was like, how could you let her sit there? Martha clearly wants good hospitality. She wants there to be a great experience for Jesus, the person that she absolutely adores. But yet, those good intentions means that she's missed the party. She's not quite sure exactly what's gone on, and she's completely missed that whole relationship. The wronged person at this point feels righteous. Martha feels righteous in what she's saying. She's saying to Jesus, don't you care? Tell her to sort it out. Martha is, I'm right. What I'm saying is right. Well, firstly, don't ever assume to know that you know what Jesus should do. At this point, Martha is telling Jesus what to do. Jesus, tell Mary to get back. And when we look further on, Jesus has other ideas. Don't ever assume that you know what Jesus should do. And that can be quite tricky, can't it? Martha made this huge assumption that she was completely correct. Martha said, yes, do it. And Jesus brought her back down to earth, in a sense. We need to humble ourselves in the presence of Jesus. Far too often for me, myself, my prayer life consists of petitions and requests to Jesus. Me asking him to do things. And I try and realise, yes, I can't tell Jesus what to do because God has his own plans and his own things, but all too often it ends up being a Martha-like prayer of, come on God, I'm struggling here, could you help me? Could you do this? Could you do that? And that's kind of where Martha was at here. She's saying, yeah, this is the problem. I'm suffering here at this point, so fix it for me for this. But actually, it was wrong. And Jesus responded in a completely different way. So we need to humble ourselves in the presence of Jesus. We need to let Jesus guide and lead us in our prayer life. Our prayers probably need to change a little bit. We can still request things from Jesus. It says that clearly in the Bible. We can still ask for things. But actually, when we're expecting Jesus to do things to the point of us telling him exactly what we want, like Martha did here, we've probably stepped out of line a bit too much. I have this personal motto. Some of you will probably know that I'm a little bit lazy. But I don't like to do things very often. I'll more than happily sit down and watch TV for as long as I can until something has to be done. However, not many of you will know that actually I have another motto apart from being lazy, which is if I do something, I generally try and do it as well as I possibly can. The trick is to try and choose what to do. But there's a kind of a lesson here, and while some people have taken some things like maybe potentially out of context in the passage with translations, talking with Jesus' response, and some people translate it to Jesus saying, basically, one plate of food would do, which necessarily might not be the translation. There's still a lesson here that actually if you're going to do something, if something is worth doing, it might be worth doing simply. So instead of going all out and going crazy, like Martha did, she wanted to clearly do an exciting experience. Instead of that, it might have made sense just to do something simply. I love this example here, and again it refers back to the example of the Good Samaritan. If you see someone, so works are important, well, we know that, but if you see someone hurt on Jericho Road, help them, support them. But do not then go up as Jericho Road Missionary Society to support everyone else on that road. It's worthwhile doing something, but it might be worthwhile doing it simply. Also, the response of Jesus, the calming of Martha, is really, really interesting. I love this. I don't know about you, my version of the Bible isn't particularly dramatised. I once did have a tape recording of the dramatised version of the Bible. That was brilliant. I used to put it on to go to sleep to, and the narrator would sometimes go, oh yes, this. Well, no, this has happened! And I'll suddenly wake up and go, whoa! So, great, but when I was reading this, it wasn't dramatised. But however, we can see in the passage that when Jesus responds to Martha, we can see something quite interesting, and that's the repetition of the name, Martha, Martha. If you look at other examples where Jesus repeats the name, and there's examples in the Old Testament as well where God says it explicitly, but Simon, when he's correcting, Saul, and then on the cross, my God, my God. Jesus doubles his names up in probably the same way that we double a name up now. It's not an explicit telling off. It's not a, oh, come on! It's not a shout, which maybe as a parent we might do. But it's more of a, I've got something important to tell you. Martha, Martha, come here. It's a calming phrase, but also a phrase where it says, listen to me, because I've got something really important to tell you. And at this point, he's saying, Martha, Martha. It's a kind, sensitive word, rather than, Martha, come here, I'm going to tell you off. And actually at that moment, when Martha's right at the very, very top of her kind of tether, that's probably the right way to do it, isn't it? As a parent, I often struggle to know how to calm my kids down. And yeah, having the wisdom of Jesus at that point, just to calmly say, Martha, Martha. Those two words alone in Jesus' way of talking probably would have been enough just to temper Martha down to that point. So the end of this bit is the explosion and how to pray to Jesus in a way. Don't be afraid to come to Jesus with issues or concerns. Clearly not. Come to Jesus with things that you may feel wrong. You might feel frustrated at someone in the church or someone in the wider thing. We can pray to Jesus. But Jesus will treat us with respect and care like he did to Martha, but he might also correct us at times. I know many times I felt very wronged at times, and I felt very wrong for a long time. And then upon reflection, you think, oh, actually, hold on a minute, maybe it wasn't all the other person. Maybe it was just me. So, let's take a brief look at Mary. Let's think about what Mary's done. On the surface, and again, growing up and hearing this passage quite a lot, I generally have always sided with Martha. Martha strikes me as being the one who actually gets the job done. And Mary strikes me on the surface, before we really look into it, as someone who's the kind of person that when they see something slightly more interesting in what they're doing, they run off. You know, a bit like my kids. You know, like, yeah, Daddy, I'll help you peel the potatoes. But as soon as a new TV program comes on the TV, oh yes, I'll go see that instead. Mary strikes me as that kind of person, to start with. But here, in this passage, we have Jesus saying that Mary is actually the one who has her head in the right place, and a heart focused on something eternal, which is much more important than the things that Martha's doing. Well, this is quite a shift of Jesus saying this, and again, I've already said it, but I'll say it again. The simple act of a woman sitting at the feet of Jesus at this point in this culture is quite unheard of. It could be today as well, when there's still stuff to be done in the kitchen. What's Mary doing sitting there? She should be working, surely. But Jesus accepted it and said, no, Mary has chosen the right thing to do. If we take a look at where Mary of Bethany has been seen elsewhere, we can see her at 3 different times, all at the feet of Jesus. She is there listening in this example. She's there anointing feet in another example. And she's there sharing her woes, crying, bawling her eyes out in another example. At these times, if people wanted to learn from a great teacher, they would sit at the feet. Think about like in a school classroom. Teacher sat there, probably in a school like this, teacher sat there maybe reading story time or teaching a foundation, a new letter or a new word, and they would sit on a chair and the kids would sit on the floor underneath them, around them. The children would sit and look up to the teacher. That's what Mary was doing. She was clearly at that position where she wanted to hear from a great teacher. And all other things should go to the side. She knew who Jesus was. She knew, oh yes, this is where I want to be. So here's a question for you. When was the last time you sat at the feet of Jesus? Now, if you take that completely practical, that's impossible, isn't it? Because Jesus isn't here anymore. However, when was the last time you actually got down like Mary on the floor, wept, or honoured Jesus, or listened at the feet of Jesus? Jesus says that Mary chose the better part because a ministry to our spirits, a ministry to listening and understanding Jesus precedes a ministry to others. The first command when Jesus summarizes 10 Commandments is to love the Lord God with all your heart, soul and strength and mind. The second is to love your neighbour as you love yourselves. They don't get mixed around, do they? The Bible never puts love your neighbour as yourself first. It always says love the Lord God with all your heart, soul and strength. There's a reason for that, and that's because we need to get our spirit in check. We need to get our relationship with Jesus in check, fully set up before we can even consider doing works of God. If we start doing works without spirit-centered soul, it can destroy us. It can burn us out. Some of you might have been there before, where you've been doing works and you think to yourself, you know what, I just want to get out of this. I've had enough. It can be really, really difficult doing in that environment where actually you might not even realise that you have the priorities slightly set wrong. You might think you've got it fine, but then as the time goes on, things start to slightly wind you up and really frustrate you in doing your works. Back when I used to do Blast here, back when on Monday evenings the kids work, I would get home from work and I would go, oh, another Blast, another one. And it was never, oh yes, I'm going to Blast, I'm going to work for the kids, I'm going to help spread the message of Jesus across. I would never pray to Jesus and say, oh Jesus, thank you so much for this. It would always be not another one, not another one. And then as time went on, I started to twist it around and thought to myself, well, you know what, it's always me, it's always two other people. Why isn't anyone else helping in this? And it all started to get warped out of control. And at that point I thought, I've got it wrong. And this is where the passage about Mary and Martha really sits at home. Where are the priorities in doing Christian service? Is it because you want to do a service? Or is it because you love Jesus so much and you are so full of the excitement that you then want to work and love your neighbour as yourself because of Jesus' love for you? And again, it's so easy to lose grip of that as time goes on. You might do it at the start. You might choose a particular service at the start because that's the one you want to do because you're there. But as time goes on, you might lose sight of your original choice for that service. I'm sure many of you will know that I'm probably more a Martha than a Mary myself. I'm the guy who will probably not talk to many people at the very end of the service, but I'll start packing away because I like to get things done. That's just the way I am. It's probably the way most of us are, actually. There's probably much less Marys in a church than there are Marthas. I'm going to tell you a little story, just to kind of summarise it. There's a story that I picked up on another sermon on the internet talking about this. It's a story of a mother and son. The father died when the boy was young. This was the days before TV or that kind of thing, so in the evenings, they spent the evenings listening to the radio or reading to each other as the son was growing up. And they both really enjoyed listening to good music together. In his early 20s, the son met a young woman at church and they fell in love, and they got married. At this time, housing was really hard to find, so the mother said, well, I have a 2-storey house, so I can make an apartment for myself on the top floor, and you can live on the first floor. And then she carried on and said, the only thing that I ask is that when you get a chance to spend some time together, so the only thing I ask is that we get a chance to spend some time together, because I'm going to miss the reading and the music. And her son said to mother, you can be sure of that, it's really important to me too. The couple married, and for a while life continued. The son would stop by, he'd crawl upstairs and spend some time with his mum each week. But he was busy. Obviously, as time went on, days and weeks went by, the relationship between him and his mum was not as it had been. He wouldn't read with him, he wouldn't listen to music with each other. On one of his mum's birthday, the young man brought a lovely dress for her. And he said, oh, happy birthday, Mum. She opened the package and looked at the dress and went, oh, son, thank you. I really appreciate what you brought for me. But he said, Mum, something's off. Don't you like it? She said, yes, I do like it. It's my colour. Thank you very much. I really, that kind of force. Yeah, I really like it. It's lovely. He said, Mum, I've got the receipt here. If you don't like it, we can return it and get something different. And she said, no, it's a lovely dress. I really like it. And he said, Mum, I know you. We've been together for a long time. I know. Something's wrong. What is it? The woman turned and opened up her closet and said, look, I've got more than enough dresses to last me for the rest of my life. I guess what I really want to say is that the dress is nice, but I didn't need the dress. I actually just wanted you. That's kind of what Jesus is saying in this passage, isn't it? That actually, works are great, but actually sometimes we just need to come and surrender to Jesus and listen to him and accept that actually Jesus is much more important than anything that we're doing on this earth. And just give ourselves to God completely. And that's a really, really, really tricky thing, particularly when we think that we are doing works for God. Particularly when we think we are doing things. And remember, I did say works are important, that Jesus isn't here saying that we don't have to do things, but we need to get our priorities straight to start with. So, the way the service has been set up, we now have some time at the end of the service, and what I would love to do is to spend a short bit of time just thinking about that. Have a short time maybe of some ministry, it could be personal ministry, it could be, we could pray for other people, but I want to play a song At this point, I was meant to pick a song, and I've got a selection of songs that Matt's got to play, and I want to play the one on the laptop, Matt, the Surrender song. Because actually, I said this word, didn't I? We need to surrender to Jesus sometimes. I don't know about you. If I had been sat there at Jesus' feet, I said I'm more of a Martha. If I'd been sat there at Jesus' feet, I'd have been listening. I'd have been really listening. But at the same time, I'd have been keeping an ear out for the timer. I'd have been keeping an ear out, making sure the carrots weren't boiling over. I'd been making sure I wouldn't have been completely surrendered to Jesus. That's just the way I am. But actually, Jesus demands it of ourselves. Out of respect for Jesus, we do need to come to him. And that can be really difficult. Reading the Bible is fantastic. Praying is fantastic. But actually, even when I do that, even when I read the Bible, sometimes I'll be reading it and realise that I've read a whole chapter, but I've been thinking about something else completely differently. That moment of true surrender, where we actually open our hearts, open our souls to Jesus, let the Holy Spirit come in and completely minister to ourselves, is something that is quite rare. And if you can get that nailed, if you can get that really, really sorted, it doesn't have to be all the time, but if you can really get that, your relationship with Jesus can be so much better. And therefore, the works that you do, the things that you do, likewise, will be so much richer, just like Mary's was.